Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us LinkedIn Live on your lunch break. I am joined today by three panelists who each have decades of experience in corporate, professional, mindset, and they've joined me for this important discussion in honor of May Mental Health Awareness Month. My name is Maria Dastur, and I will invite all of our panelists to introduce themselves shortly. Remember, this is LinkedIn, so please connect with all the panelists. Let our network become your network. All right, everyone, grab a piece of scratch paper and a pen. You're going to need it later. Just have it standing by. Do you know what the World Health Organization has labeled the #1 health epidemic of the 21st century? Can you guess? Stress, of course. And workplace stress is a big factor in this global issue. I'd like to introduce my first panelist, Lili, who supports chronic people pleasers and perfectionists to shift from living out of obligation and guilt to creating a life of passion, purpose, and pleasure.
Woo, woo, woo. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for putting this together. Good morning, Shelley. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, LinkedIn. So happy to be here. And Maria, you mentioned stress as a #1 health epidemic. So I have to ask the audience, are you one of the 83% of US workers who suffer from work-related stress or feelings of frustration? Or are you one of the over 50% of employees who have symptoms of burnout, resentment, or exhaustion? And is this due to your inability to say no? Or do you suffer from the curse of perfectionism or self-sabotage? Stick around.
Awesome. I want to introduce our second panelist, Linda Galambos. Linda is a heart-centered leader coach who helps people make those big changes and navigate that question of what's next. Linda, you work with many successful professionals. What patterns do you see?
Thank you so much, Maria. Yes, I think that we all go through periods in our lives where we experience burnout and stress. And how many of you feel like you're on a hamster wheel to nowhere, feeling anxious, frustrated, or even overwhelmed at times? It may look like not wanting to go back to work on Sunday night. The Sunday scaries are a real thing. And sitting at your desk or not motivated to do the work in front of you is something else that sometimes you might see as frustration, burnout, and stress. And you might procrastinate, you might do other menial tasks, and it can even look like just feeling uncharacteristically emotional and overwhelmed.
Oh, Linda, I totally identify with these things, and I'm sure our audience does as well. I'd like to introduce our third panelist, Shelley Winters. Shelley is an integrative nutrition coach who works with clients to co-create a completely personalized plan around mental fitness, nutrition, and health. Excuse me. Shelley, what do you see in this go, 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 drive, drive, drive?
Maria, thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's my pleasure. And in answer to your question, from my experience, what I've seen as a common denominator of effects that happen to women who are hardworking as the demands increase around them is the first thing they do is begin to neglect themselves. Often they allow the stress to sit in the driver's seat, causing them to lose that personal connection with themselves and others. And they start functioning from this place like autopilot, where life starts happening to them instead of them designing the life of their choice. And on top of that, failing to recognize their own needs can layer on resentment and anger right on top of that stress, which can often result in them just shutting down altogether. They lose their ability to feel. And so I see this affecting both physical and emotional health as they sacrifice their self-care. They don't have any sort of physical activity, sleep suffers, and their healthy food choices fall right off the wagon.
Sheesh. Audience, do you resonate with any of this? I am monitoring the chat, so please, if you have specific questions or thoughts, drop them in the chat. What I'm hearing is the idea of well-worn patterns and spirals. I mean, once we find ourselves in these cycles, it's so hard to break. What's contributing to that, Linda? How do we get into these cycles and how do we stop it?
Well, one of the things that we like to coach on and teach is something called our saboteurs. And those saboteurs are our critical inner voices that whisper things like self-doubt, fear. It's that negativity that's going on in our minds. It's sabotaging our efforts and creating stress and pushing us in a way that can eventually become unhealthy, just as Shelley was describing. They often stem from deeply ingrained beliefs that we have or assumptions that might have been formed in childhood. And as a result of past experiences and cultural conditioning, we have these loops that are sometimes playing in our head. And one of the most common saboteurs that I see is what we all probably can relate to. It's our hyperachiever. Who here feels like your success is based on your output and how well you do things? Yeah, many of my clients are high achievers, and the results that is always pushing themselves. The result that they have is that they think that success is coming from the constant go, 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 push, push, push. And so that stress often gets magnified. Another common saboteur is something that we call the restless saboteur. And that, I love the analogy of the restless saboteur always is looking for more. You're never really feeling satisfied. You're always wondering and looking for what's next. So it's kind of like somebody out in the desert who's looking for water. They really want their thirst quenched. And so they're digging wells, but they end up digging 100 wells, maybe only a foot or two deep, and they never dig that one well that's really deep and where they can find the satisfying, thirst-quenching water. So these saboteurs are often on autopilot. They can influence our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, and yet they're also very pervasive. And they can take on many forms of, again, just that inner critic, feeling like you are a people pleaser, or maybe you avoid things. Lili can tell us a little bit more about how they manifest in the workplace.
Well, thank you, Linda. And I can totally relate to everything you were talking about, that hyperachiever, the avoider, the controller. And in the workplace, saboteurs wreak havoc on morale, productivity, and team cohesion. Because whenever one saboteur manifests in a person, it's like a virus, and saboteur contagion spreads like wildfire. And a saboteur hijacking simply looks like self-doubt, procrastination, perfectionism, and other behaviors that affect your success and your team success. And Linda mentioned a few of those saboteur names, and these names are simply describing patterns so you can easily identify how you or someone that you know is sabotaging the workplace. For instance, I bet you probably know a manager with a strong controller saboteur who often has to micromanage every little aspect of her projects and have everything done her way. Anybody know a controlling saboteur? And then someone with a strong pleaser saboteur prioritizes everybody else's needs ahead of her own. And this will lead to burnout and resentment. And then there's the avoider saboteur, which causes us to shy away from challenges or even making hard decisions. And then everyone has the judge. This judge finds fault with you, with everybody around you, and with the circumstances. And Shelley was telling me a story about one of her clients. Shelley?
Thanks, Lili. Yeah, I shared this story with Lili because I have a client, Susan, and she returned to a coaching session and she was so excited to tell me about a win that she had in the workplace using these skills. So Susan, a little background on her. She has a very sly and sneaky judge saboteur who cunningly shows up to criticize primarily circumstances and other people. This judge inside of her, though, fuels that inner critic, and so it tends to cause her to increase her negative thinking patterns and question herself a lot. So Susan was arriving to work on a particular Monday morning, and she was already feeling overwhelmed because of overcommitting the week before. Anyone have that experience? You know, you're bringing the baggage from the previous week into that Monday morning blues that Linda was talking about. And as she powered up her computer, sitting down at her desk, she noticed she got a last-minute email from her controlling manager calling for a 1-hour meeting that morning. And Susan was frustrated. She didn't have time for any of it. But she took a deep breath, she picked up her notepad, and she headed for the conference room. And she stayed engaged in the meeting and took note of all of the additional responsibilities that were coming her direction. But there was a clock on the wall, and as she made note of that 1-hour time limit coming to the top of the hour, she felt a restlessness come over her. And as the minutes dragged on, she began to feel those negative feelings of anxiety and frustration. And she thought, why can't people just stick to a schedule? And another thought she had was, my manager doesn't really care about anyone on this team because, you know, she has no respect for us. You know, this meeting's going on and on and on. And then it happened. She found herself starting to notice everything wrong with her manager. The way she stood, the way she talked, the way she looked. She was noticing everything that was wrong with this woman. And she just thought, this is all wrong. That was the thought that just came pounding into her mind. So this is an example of the judge saboteur and the stickler saboteur in action. So what do you think she did? What would you do in this situation? I'll tell you about what she did in a little bit, but first I'm curious, Maria, what happens if we don't change these behaviors?
Well, I'm sure that you guys in the audience can guess. Things happen. We respond with our emotions, and we stew and stew and stew on these things, and we just let the stories get out of control. And when we live our lives like this, that's when the anxiety starts, the burnout, the loss of sleep, the bad cycles of self-care that you touched on earlier. And this cycle continues to the point where we start to impact our long-term health. We impact our health span, and we impact our lifespan. And nobody wants to get there. No one wants to shorten their life because of their boss. Linda,
Amen.
what do you see?
Yeah, just like Shelley was describing, and you as well, Maria, I like to tell this story of the race car analogy because these cycles can definitely compound. And so sometimes when you think of, you see the NASCAR races and they have a pit stop and you're thinking, why in a race would you be stopping to change tires and check fluids and do all the things on a car? But taking that moment to stop actually keeps us from crashing, right? Those tires are checked. So the next lap or 2 or 20 laps, there's no crashes. And this can translate into real life when we're flying through our day and everything is just one thing after another, and we're handling it. And sometimes we end up getting pushed too far, and sometimes we can snap, and maybe we end up sending that angry email or maybe an angry text. And this makes the situation worse because then we have to go into damage control mode, where a little bit of prevention at that pit stop could have really helped mitigate that.
Thanks, Linda. That's absolutely true. And The whole purpose of Pit Stop is to help us to stay out of burnout, right? Burnout is real, people. You already know this, and you know that you need to make a change. Do you know that you can make a change? And do you know that inside of you is the power to make a change? As the race car analogy shows, there's power in being able to stop and reconnect with you. Will you allow me to share from my personal life just a little story here in this space? A few years ago, I found myself having to shift into full-time work to provide for my family. And it wasn't unusual for me to exceed 60 hours a week in my 3 jobs. And before long, I lost the emotional connection to myself and my life. Resentment built. I became negative and blaming. I had increased headaches, weight fluctuation, poor sleep, and I ate a diet primarily consisting of processed and fast foods. Can any of you relate to that? My pleaser saboteur forced me to show up to work every day. But what I started to notice was that I started to not care. I didn't really care about the quality of work that I was putting out. My thinking was trapped in an all or nothing unhealthy pattern. And my victim saboteur showed up, and I started to believe the thought that if I didn't do it, nobody else would. It can become common for us to believe our thoughts without questioning them. And when we do that, those thoughts can steal our happiness, rob our health, and dissolve our quality of life. In the big picture, I was working and living from a place of total overwhelm.
Wow, Shelley, your story is powerful, and it totally reminds me of a quote by one of my mentors, Peter Sage. He says, overwhelm leads to confusion, which leads to inaction, which leads to feeling stuck. And oftentimes, just like in your story, stress and overwhelm leads to burnout, and this can cause a sense of hopelessness. We're talking about Mental Health Awareness Month in May, and we're getting into some interesting territory, the edges of our comfort zone. And so we're talking about even a loss of sense of self-identity. And I have a client just like you, who had her job first, and she had a really strong pleaser saboteur, Kayleen. And being a nurse, there's always an emergency to handle, right? And everybody else comes first. And so she started to feel burnout. But not only was she feeling burnt out, she started to feel resentful. And then, just like Maria says, we are emotional creatures, and this feeling resentful, then she started feeling guilty because she was feeling resentful. And there was just no place for her to go. And so she felt like she completely lost her sense of purpose, her why she was getting up in the morning. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know what she liked. And she was just tired and exhausted because she was so used to putting everyone else first. And these are classic symptoms of somebody with a strong pleaser saboteur. And so to those of you listening, I would ask, do you know anyone with a strong pleaser saboteur? Or do you have those same kind of characteristics and coping mechanisms left over from childhood?
Yeah, wow, Lily, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important for us, as we've now really painted the picture, excuse me, is to talk about what we can do about it. And so one of the things that I like to really teach about is that we all have things that drain us and things in our workplace that charge us. And some of our job responsibilities that are drainers might warrant a new conversation with your boss about what could possibly change. We also all have responsibilities in our job that we like. Well, at least we should, right? Because that's why we took the job in the first place. So finding where the balance is. Because when we get into a place where there's too many things draining us, then that is where more of this resentment comes in. We're working and living in a state of overwhelm. And so I would want to ask the audience, do you feel like you have balance right now in your job? What about in your people circle? Who are you spending time with? And are the people that actually provide a charge for you, or are they sometimes somebody that might drain you? So looking at that balance in our life is really important in a lot of different areas.
Or are you hanging on by your fingernails? Are you one more rejection, one more no, one more block away from just losing it? I mean, it is May Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's why we chose this topic. The idea that you have to put your oxygen on yourself first in an airplane crash, right? You have to take care of yourself first, or you can't take care of anyone else, let alone function at the level that you need to accelerate in leadership in the workplace. So how do we fix it? What have you done already? I mean, if you everyone on LinkedIn, you are all professionals. What have you done to get you to this point in your career? If you want to share in the chat, if you have any hacks, any things that you do. And then I'm going to invite Lili to share some other tips next. And I think she's going to take us through that exercise. Remember how I asked you to grab a piece of paper and a pen? Hold it out now. And Lili, take it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. So the first step I always tell all of my clients is to take a deep breath. And then when you can take a deep breath and focus on creating something on the piece of paper as you're breathing, you can marry the movement of your pen with your breath and do something I call drawing the breath. And this is an exercise that I gave to my client Kayleen, and she can use it anytime she's starting to feel stressed out or overwhelmed. And you'll notice a shift as you do this. And don't let the simplicity fool you, because this is a very powerful exercise. And so if you haven't already, go ahead and take a deep breath in through your nose. I invite you to take a deep breath in through your nose and then blow it out like you're blowing out the candles on a cake. And then take your pen and your piece of paper and take another deep breath in. And as you exhale, draw your pen down. And as you inhale, draw your pen up, leaving your pen on the page the entire time. And so just start doing this drawing exercise. And you'll notice some questions will run through your mind, like, am I doing this right? Or what's going on? But as you start to just focus in on your breathing and marrying the movement of your pen to the piece of paper, you will start to get into the flow of becoming present to this moment, becoming present to your existence, understanding that you are a powerful creator and you can calm your nervous system, calm the outside, and just start tuning in to your own self, your own world. And it only takes 2 minutes in my experience. You can do that as long or as short as you want. So I hope that you try that next time you're feeling stressed out. And I know that we have more exercises for you.
Oh, that is one I had never heard before. And I have a squiggle of lines, but I noticed as I went on in the beginning, my lines were really bumpy. And then as I went on, they got smoother and smoother. I don't know what that means, but that's what happened for me. Now, this isn't always accessible, right? Yes, you have a piece of paper and pen, but if you're in a meeting and you're being pushed, you can't really start doing this in a meeting. So Shelley, are there any other examples, that some other types of tools that we can share with our audience?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Actually, we all know that mindfulness can quell stress, but oftentimes we can't be in a studio or at a desk with a paper and pen like Lili just proficiently shared with us. So the foundation of positive intelligence is mental fitness. And this is developed using the magic of something we call a PQ rep. This is an 8 to 10 second, excuse me, exercise that can bring mindfulness with you wherever you go, even in a very public space. And one way that you can do that is focusing on the sensation of touch, whether it's skin to skin, or whether it's skin to fabric. There is a calming of the saboteur energy that comes from this simple exercise. So remember my client, Susan, that I talked about who had her judge saboteur activated? As her inner critic started to run down the runway of negativity, she remembered her PQ training and stopped in an instant. She did what Lily said. She started with a deep breath in and out. And then she chose a new, more useful thought. And that thought was, nothing has gone wrong here. And to reinforce that thought, she took her fingertips and she put them on her pants. So just put your fingertips on your pants. And then she started to feel the texture of the fabric and the temperature of the material. And in that moment, she had realized that she had done it. She had intercepted that negative critical thinking pattern that she had leveled at her manager, and she was able to stop those thoughts and move back into being present in that meeting at that table with her notepad and pen. And she was able to reinvest in that moment. And by doing this, Susan was able to keep her performance edge, and she was able to stay a positive influence in that meeting. And when she left the meeting and went back to her desk, she took a clear, focused mind back with her instead of one that was riddled with the baggage of the criticism of everything that happened. So by understanding and identifying our common saboteurs and their effects on teams and individuals, we can dismantle their power and cultivate a more positive and productive work environment. And we can do it with something as simple as an 8 to 10 second PQ rep that we can take with us anywhere.
You're muted, Linda.
That's really awesome, Shelley. And I appreciate the PQ rep with touch. And I've had a client who actually used that with her grown child who was still living at home. And she did it more with a visual PQ by really focusing on the features of his face and his eyes. And they had often had a little bit of a combative relationship. He was an adult child still living at home. She was asking him to participate in some of the chores around the house. And there was just this energy, like you had mentioned, Shelley, the saboteur contagion energy where one person is rubbing the other person wrong. And this can apply in our workplace. I mean, who here has had a coworker that for some reason rubbed you the wrong way? And sometimes we can't really identify what that energy is. And so taking the time to pause and connect with yourself through a simple PQ rep of touch, or visually really looking at the person or the situation with your eyes, and just bringing yourself back into your own mindfulness, just as Shelley was talking about. We can start to shift our energy from being contagious and feeding off each other in a negative way. Because those mirror neurons we all have in our brain are unconsciously, they're picking up on the emotion and the energy and even the habits of those that are around us. And this is where the whole peer pressure when we were teenagers and even as adults can come into play, where we still have this feeling of peer pressure where we're just wanting to unintentionally kind of pick up on the negativity or the conversation around the conference table. So being a strong self-observer, just as Shelley was saying, and becoming more mindful is something that can help us shift and stop that.
Wow. So how can you learn? Are you interested in learning what your saboteurs are? I put up a list here of all the different saboteurs. Which one do you think you are? Write it down on that piece of paper, but then go and take the free quiz and see if you guessed right. It's fun. It's totally free. Each of the panelists, myself included, all lead people just like you through 6 to 7 week cohort trainings on this program, on the positive intelligence program, to teach you these tools, the intercept muscle, the PQ reps, and then how to live your life in SAGE. That means living it without reacting emotionally to everything all the time. It's much more to that than that, but that's the easy way of explaining it. In the comments for this event, I have linked up the saboteur quiz, and I've also shared little bios and the links of each of the speakers. So please take the saboteur quiz, link up with the speakers. We all would offer you a connection call to go over the results of your saboteur quiz and give you some insights of how your saboteurs might be showing up in your workplace and in your relationships and in your life as a whole. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Lily, Shelley, and Linda. I am so glad that we were able to do this for Mental Health Awareness Month. The recording will be here. So if your friends missed this, if you want to share it with someone, please do. If you want to go back and watch anything, it will be here. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Maria.
Bye. Thank
Thanks.
you.